Welcome, everyone, to this afternoon's session of the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee. We've got an inquiry starting this afternoon into cladding remediation follow-up. It's following the government's recent announcements about their intended action with regard to funding cladding removal and how that's going to work in practice. We've got two panels this afternoon who will introduce as we come to each of the sessions, and then we have a follow-up with the Minister for Building Safety next week, where everything will be explained to us about the government's intentions with regard to this, and we'll take issues from today from our witnesses and then be putting those to the Minister next week. Before I come over to our witnesses for the first panel, I'm just going to ask committee members to put on record any particular interest they may have that may be relevant to this inquiry, as well as the ones that are in their declaration of members' interests. I'm a Vice President of the Local Government Association, and I'll just go down the list that I can see on my screen. Imburn.
Thanks, Chair. I'm an Assistant Councillor in Liverpool.
Ben Everett.
I'm a councillor.
Right. Andrew Lewis.
As well as the Register of Interests, I'm Vice President of the LGA as well.
Right. Mary Robinson.
Employer Councillor in my staff team.
Bob Blackman.
I'm a Vice President of the LGA and I employ a councillor in my staff team.
Right. And Florence. Florence hasn't joined us yet. Is that right? Can't see her. Okay, we'll come back to Florence in due course. And I think Florence Shalom is a member of the London Assembly, and we'll have Rachel Hopkins probably joining us later on, who is a Vice President of the LGA, and I think a councillor in Luton for the time being as well. Right, that's done with us putting on record our particular interest. Now over to our first panel of witnesses this afternoon. I'll ask them to introduce themselves and say a little bit about themselves. Dr. Will Martin.
Hi there. Hi, I'm an affected leaseholder of a flat in Sheffield, which I bought in 2015. We have ACM cladding along with a range of many other problems in the building. I'm also the co-founder of UK Cladding Action Group, which was formed back in 2019 to unite leaseholders across the country that are affected by this scandal. We've now built up a large network of buildings across the country and co-launched the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign with Inside Housing and the Manchester Gladiators.
Right, you're very welcome today, Will. Thank you. Dr. Dean Buckner.
Hello, yeah, I'm Dean Buckner. Retired from the Bank of England in 2018. Now working in the on a voluntary basis with Leasehold Knowledge Partners. Most of my career has been in finance and derivatives valuation, swaps and bonds. And my primary expertise is in the financial area and not in leasehold law. Thank you.
Right. I suppose derivatives and all the complications probably look relatively easy compared with the cladding problems we're facing. Anyway, we'll come easier, on.
Yes.
Yes. Right. And finally, Nigel Glen. Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Nigel Glen. I'm the CEO of the Association of Residential Managing Agents. The association has 330 members and manages around 1.5 million leaseholds. I also have a background in investment banking from my past.
Right. All three of you are welcome. Most of the questions I think we'll want answers from the three of you. Members of the committee can indicate who they'd like to answer first. I always say to witnesses, there's three of you. It can take quite a long time if you all speak at length, particularly if you all say the same things after each other. So if you agree with what somebody else has said, please just tell us and we're happy to report that. Right. Let's make a start then and look at the Secretary of State made a statement to the House of Commons on the 10th of February about trying to provide additional financial assistance to the leaseholders and others in buildings which face problems with potentially dangerous cladding. And he indicated that it would be to avoid punishing those who worked hard and bought their own home. And also to try and speed up the nature of the works as well. Are you all happy that the £3.5 billion, which is a lot of money that's been found by the government actually does protect leaseholders and make their homes safer. Perhaps I just come over to Will Martin first, because obviously you live in one of these properties.
No, I'm not happy. I mean, the government say that they want to fix the problem and offer certainty and reassurance, but what has been announced so far doesn't actually do this. It seems like HCLG can't seem to relate the impact that their decisions on the main final stakeholders in this mess are actually having on innocent leaseholders. Ever since the announcement on the 10th of February, there has been a constant flurry of emails into our inbox, and the majority of which express two things. One, disappointment, and the second is a feeling of betrayal. Firstly, on the disappointment, that largely comes from a feeling that the announcement doesn't protect leaseholders. The latest step, of course, as you say, it's a huge amount of money, but given your own recommendations, the fact that it's going to cost £15 billion to fix the problem, it is just another piecemeal offering 4 years on from Grenfell. The G15 have committed £2.9 billion of funding for building safety remediation and potentially own 10% of relevant buildings. So that really puts into context how much £5.1 billion is. And this disappointment comes really because it's not about cladding anymore. It's about insulation. It's about balconies. It's about compartmentation. It's about fire doors. The list goes on. You can't make a building half safe. My building's a really good example. We've got ACM, which has been funded, but the remaining estimated £6.2 million worth of work is not covered by the funds. So in 12 months' time, when the scaffolding's down and the ACM's been removed, the building will still remain unsafe and it will still be unsellable. And it will remain like that without intervention because the leaseholders do not have the money. We've said this time and time again. We can't afford a £52,000 bill at Metis. Genric said about caveat emptor. If he's happy to apply that to cladding, then why are the government happy to, apply it to, not happy to apply it to a whole range of other equally expensive and dangerous problems, which, just like cladding, were not caused by leaseholders and are again symptomatic of years and years of poor regulatory failure and poor developer practice. It also doesn't protect leaseholders, because the terms of the building safety agreements require all funds to be in place before money will be dispersed for cladding issues. So I really would like to know how they expect works to start on buildings with both cladding and non-cladding issues, where leaseholders do not have the money to pay for non-cladding works to start with, but where both sets of work need to be completed together. And then just to touch on the sense of betrayal that leaseholders are expressing, right. This comes from the loan scheme that's been announced.
We'll come on to that in more detail later on. I think you've also answered part of the next question as well.
Sorry.
So it's all right. No, I understand, and I understand how you feel, because obviously being in one of these properties gives you a particular insight into what's happening. Dr. Dean Buckner, you'd like to?
Yeah, well, everything that Will said, but just to add to that, we've had a few discussions with Michael Wade earlier on in December and early January. And
would you say who Michael Wade is for people who may be listening?
Sorry, Michael Wade is and certainly was an advisor, a special advisor to the ministry, and he was the one who advised on the loan scheme. And in our discussions with him, a lot of what he said was premised on the idea that the total bill for all this could come into well over the 3.5 billion, perhaps up to 12 or more billion. So there's that bit of evidence. Plus, we've also been looking at individual anecdotal reports of what people are owing on a per unit basis, on a per home basis. And these numbers, admittedly, they're anecdotal and there may be some sort of selection bias here, but these numbers are coming in at well above the £20,000 odd that you would expect from the figure that we have seen. One which is actually local to me, I live in Wandsworth, I think it's £100,000 for one flat. So the evidence is that the total bill per unit and total bill is going to be well above 3.5 billion or thereabouts.
Of course. Nigel Glen. Nigel.
Again, I agree with the first two witnesses. I have some data on the non-cladding costs, which are the ones that really concern us. And don't forget, this won't be just cladded buildings. This could be across the whole building sector. But you're looking, as William and Dean said, at roughly comparable figures. So in the 20,000s per leaseholder, which is impossible amounts of money. So what do? We can't solve one half, which is the cladding, but not the other, which is the compartmentation and the fire breaks. I'll happily share those figures later on if you wish.
Yes, no, that would be really helpful. Thank you, Nigel. I think it's all building up that base of evidence that the committee very much needs. Just coming back to the loan scheme then, because that was very much a feature probably that had been trawled by Michael way before about to solve the problem without government having to put all the money in up front. Does anyone understand the scheme? And tell us what it means for leaseholders, indeed, what it means for the building and the so-called building owner. Do you want to come into that, Dean Buckner, first of all?
Yeah, in direct answer to your question, don't understand the scheme, because we've had several versions of it, a couple from Michael Wade. We met Stephen Greenhalgh, or was it Greenhalgh, in December. We don't have a clear sense. The original proposal was that you would create for every building a legal entity corresponding to the building, and a loan would be made to that, which would then be recovered via the freeholders and ultimately the leaseholders. We don't think, and I won't go into detail, we have a document we've written up with our lawyer that goes into great detail about why that is very difficult to do. So one version of the loan scheme, is you lend to the building. Another version we've heard more recently is that the loan is to the freeholders, who then collect it via a service charge from the leaseholders. We don't think, for various reasons, again, in more detail I can say here, we don't think that will work either. But in answer to your question, don't understand at all.
Well, can I just press you on the detail about why it won't work to the freeholders? Because I think it's actually a key element of this. If it won't work, then I think we need to understand why, at least if in just a little bit more detail.
And in just a little bit more detail. Yes, right. We think, first of all, some freeholders may already be encumbered, because many freeholders, an awful lot of them, will have a charge on their interest in the building, and they will not be able to take out a separate loan on the basis of that charge. So that is one reason. Unless we understand the legal details from the ministry in better detail, then we don't see how that can work.
Okay, Nigel Glen, you want to follow up from your understanding of the situation?
Well, like yourself, Chair, the details have still to be really announced out. I mean, how long is it going to be for? What happens if somebody defaults? So if a leaseholder cannot or will not pay, who is left liable to pay that shortfall? I think it's important to realise the positive part of this is it's something we've been asking for a long time, which is front funding so we can get people safe. The bad part is we did say, perhaps rather naively, and then government can figure out who should pay afterwards. And they've picked on the leaseholder, which is exactly what we didn't want to see happen, because you are crossing a moral Rubicon there, because you're now making people pay for something which happened way before they took occupation. So the details are sketchy. How it hangs together, how it will be repaid, there's an awful lot more. And well, personally, I just don't know at this stage how it will actually work its way through.
Will Martin? Will?
Yeah, I'd echo what they've said. I think the main concern that jumps to my mind is about equity. And I would ask everyone here today, would you really purchase one of these flats with a huge loan on it? Because there is no doubt in our eyes that this scheme will leave leaseholders in negative equity, which will have disastrous consequences. I think there's the whole question as well around this arbitrary 18 meters. Living in a low-rise building doesn't mean you're richer. It doesn't mean to say that you can afford a loan scheme. And actually, I think it's worth considering that living in a low-rise building means that there's fewer number of flats, which means that remediation costs for other fire safety defects, which are on top of loans, are likely to be higher. There's loads of talk about how £50 is affordable, but we are forgetting about all of the other costs that leaseholders are facing. Inside Housing saying that 1 in 6 leaseholders are exploring bankruptcy, and that just 4% say that they could comfortably afford such a loan. So I want to know about the modelling around this loan. What has been done? What percentage of affected leaseholders are likely to declare bankruptcy, and what percentage will go into forfeiture?
Yep. Okay. I think there's a lot of questions there we'll be wanting to put to the Minister next week about whether the Ministry's done any assessment of those matters. Just very briefly, so if there isn't enough money so far in the pot with £3.5 billion, and it's not, the loan schemes doesn't look to be very favourable, just briefly, what is the fix then, financially?
Shall I kick off?
Yeah, you kick off then. Okay.
Yes, we submitted in December and then to the Ministry a proposal for a special purpose vehicle, which would be like a bond and which would pay to the investors, private investors, insurance companies, or the government itself would pay a market coupon to whoever invested in it, which would be recovered not by any kind of loan, but via a levy to whatever parties of the government decides should be levied upon. So the ultimate creditor, the ultimate obligors are not leaseholders or freeholders, but the entity itself. It will be underwritten by a government guarantee, but it would be unusual for a special purpose vehicle in that it has, actually not unusual, because the Financial Services Compensation Scheme works in the same way. So does the license fee, so does the road tax levy. So it will be a vehicle that has statutory powers with the powers to levy. We propose developers, freeholders via a levy on ground rent, possibly non-dom foreign buyers, but that's up for grabs. That's not essential to the scheme. The main virtue of the scheme is that leaseholders would not be left with a forced loan, that those who can afford to pay would pay, and also significantly that you could have what's called a forward start. You would structure the vehicle so that the levy is not imposed until year 5. Nothing levied before then, so that we can get everything in place, so that the funds are there and available from those who purchased the vehicle, their interest in the vehicle, so that work could start straight away. No delays of any kind.
Okay. Any comments on that from Nigel or Will?
And anything that takes the pain away from the leaseholders, I'd be in favour of.
Well, okay, right. We're looking at the progress that's been made now on dealing with these this cladding and other problems. Bob Blackman.
Okay, thank you very much, Clive, and thanks to our witnesses for starting, I think, to answer some of my questions already. But obviously, one of the issues here is the progress of remediation. Secretary of State has announced and been followed up by housing ministers that almost 95% of all high-rise buildings with unsafe ACM cladding have been identified since the beginning of last year. They've been either remediated or workers are on site, and 100% of social housing has been remediated. Now, first off, do you actually recognise those figures as being correct? And then secondly, what your assessment is of the progress of remediation of other forms of cladding, such as HPL and other unsafe cladding. Can I start with Nigel, maybe, on this particular issue?
Of course, Rob. I don't have figures to hand on the progress of ACM in the private sector, because I'm just a part of that, and I will happily survey my members and ask them about that. I don't have visibility with the public. If I can talk about going forward, though, it is very slow, simply because funds have only become available since the BSF fund was announced and closed off, so early September. So very early days for that, because in leasehold, you can't start these works without the money. The promise of the money is nice to know, but without the money, you can't start. So that has been a limiting factor. The other thing to start thinking about is the future, which is how quickly can we remediate? I believe I've said that before to this very committee, that if you gave me £50 billion tomorrow, this is not going to be over by next summer. You know, we're talking thousands of buildings, and we can do maybe 200, 300, 400 a year. So this is a 5 to 10 year project, and that then leads us to ask, well, what happens then? So if I say to William, wonderful news, you qualify for the BSF, but it's going to be 5 years till we get around to your block. What does he do if he needs to move to for a job or something along those lines? He's stuck. So there's a lot of moving parts going on here. The market will adjust, more people will come in, et cetera, and it is an opportunity to upskill apprenticeships, build up our construction industry, but it is going to take time to do this.
Okay, I'm going to come on to a few more details in a minute. Dean, do you want to give us your view on progress thus far?
As I say, I'm not an expert in this area, but our own expert thinks it could be up to 15 years, okay, for the reasons that Nigel has already suggested.
Okay. And obviously, from William's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, that 95% is a bugbear of mine. I think I want to go on record by saying that I actually don't think it's something to be proud of. In fact, I think it's pretty shameful that 4 years on from Grenfell, there's any building with ACM ACM still on it, let alone 132 high rises. But secondly, that figure is grossly misleading. 35% of private residential buildings above 18 metres have actually completed remediation. And those that have received the ACM funding, just 9 out of 99 have completed remediation. So just 9. And of course, you can put a builder on a site, but it doesn't make the building safe. But it certainly allows Lord Greenhalgh to say that 157 buildings have been started work on last year. I know, for example, in my building, we had a panel of cladding removed in December, but the works didn't really start properly until January. And the data that we have is just the tip of the iceberg. It's for ACM above 18 metres. In 2019, we met with government and they actually asked, can we have your Excel spreadsheet with all of your building data on? They have no handle of the scale of this problem. They didn't have then, and they have no handle on the scale of all of the other problems that are plaguing these buildings. It's estimated that there are 88,000 buildings over 11 metres, 58,000 of which will require an EWS 1 form. And we know that between 80 and 90% of them require some form of remediation. So if we go by how the progress has been on the ACM fund, then we are going to be here for a long time. And the point about timescales is, if all of this work is going to take so long, and we are prepared to wait that long, does that not show that the risks can't justify the works? If the risks were so great, then would we not be diverting resources from new buildings to fix the facades of existing buildings? We seem to be ploughing on ahead with this rip and replace approach without really bothering to work out if the probability of a facade fire justifies the solution that's been applied to every building. There's no costing, there's no evidence, there's no risk of prioritisation, and it just means that leaseholders have been turned into this indemnity fund for everyone from management agents to insurers. It's really disappointing the speed at which this is happening.
We're here to gather evidence, so I'm not going to give my views on this as we go along. The other issue, which I think, William, you've picked up on already slightly, but I just want to explore a bit further, is clearly the government scheme is for high-rise buildings above 18 metres, the loan scheme for those below 18 metres, but it only covers the cladding, as you've said. Have you got an estimate of the amount of money or work that your organisation's put together in terms of doing the other issues, the fire safety defects and so on, that of course are hand in glove with this particular problem?
So I think Nigel has got some stats on non-cladding related.
I'm going to come to Nigel in a minute, but but have you got, as your organisation, got any handle on what how much work is involved and over what period of time?
We don't, and really, we look to the government to be doing that. They haven't collected.
I'm not suggesting that you should have. I'm asking for evidence, because one of the problems is, one of our challenges is getting the information from the government in the right sort of way.
No, we don't.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, well, so we'll come to Nigel. Your view on this.
Well, we got data from 400 blocks from our members. Now, which isn't the full coverage, is it? No. And there's lots of patches inside that data. So to give you some idea, in just over 200 of those, we have sufficient data for 18 metre plus blocks. And it works out to be round about, on average, £2.1 million to do the cladding work, which works out at around about £22,500 per flat. So that gives you the idea what the BSF should cover. Now, a subsector of that, it's only 40, but that's only because we've only got data on 40. It doesn't mean that the other 160 out of that 200 is zero. On those 40, when you look at that, it comes out at around about £25,500 per flat for the non-cladding work. So this is our question, which is, if we're going as managing agents, if we're having to remediate these, again, I'll turn to Will and say, great news. You've got some money from BSF, and by the way, we now need to ask you for £25,500 for the other works, or else we can't start. So where does that stop us? To me, it actually torpedoes the whole program. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this could be across the whole stock. So one of the things we're asking is, should the government look at doing a survey, because mine is a small subset of data. It might be statistically biased, as Dean will know, because it's already, these are buildings already in trouble. So look at, say, 300 buildings, knock holes in them. It'll cost about £10,000 each. Look across the public sector, the private sector. So for 3 million, that will give us an idea of, are we lucky/unlucky that we've found this sort of only 40 that have got a problem, or this is endemic across the stock, and then what needs doing. And I think something else, Bob, that you picked on earlier, or might have been Will actually, where do we stop? We have to have a very grown-up conversation of the example we use. Here's a 20-meter building with a strip of decorative cedar cladding around the top. Now, at the moment, we have to scaffold and take that down. Is that a fire risk? Really? Do we really have to spend that money? Is that the best use of taxpayers' money? So it needs to be a discussion to make sure that leaseholders are happy, insurers are happy, mortgagers are happy. So we're proposing to the government to put together a group, a fire safety delivery group, to discuss these issues, what to do about somebody who is 5 years down the line before they can be remediated, where are the bottlenecks, what is the scale of the problem, and where do we stop?
Okay. And obviously, the other issue is the capacity of the industry to do this work, as you've mentioned.
Yes.
The government is talking about recruiting a large number of inspectors to carry out the surveys, all of whom have to be trained, qualified, and then able to do these inspections. Have you had any input to the process? What would be involved in the education of such inspectors?
No, not per se. I know RICS is doing that. The capacity that I'm concerned about is there are only so many cladders, roofers, scaffolders out there. And we've estimated that there's 200 crews, and each one will take a year. Now, I'm happy to be wrong on that. Let's say it's double that, because I've had that back from government. So let's say it was 400. Well, if you're looking at 5 billion and 2 million, around about 2 million per cladding, as we've suggested, that's 2,500. So if you can only do 400 a year, that's again 5-6 years, and that's without taking into account all the work that's going to be done on the under 18-meter blocks. So there's a huge capacity problem there for the industry as a whole. And again, I don't have really good stats on that. It's not my area of expertise, but I think that's something the government should look at, just the capacity to do this. And that will knock out everything else. How are we going to build social housing if everybody's on site ripping off cladding?
Yeah. Okay. Dean, any other aspects you would like to mention on these particular issues?
Nothing to add to that, other than to add that data really is the problem. We've asked around. We rely on possibly biased anecdotal evidence, which always looks bad. But until we have a sense of, it's not just 400 blocks, but here's the total number of blocks. Here's the expected value, or the average value of paying for each block, and then per flat. Until you can assess that and get a present value for all this, you cannot make an informed decision.
Okay, so William, at the moment we seem to have a position where we don't have the data, we don't have the extent of the challenge, but we have got some estimates that are taking place. What's the impact on leaseholders of this uncertainty?
I mean, the impact on mental health is absolutely huge. We view the building safety scandal as a public health crisis, and we think that the government should be doing so too. Nearly a quarter of people have told us that they feel suicidal or want to self-harm. 9 out of 10 people say that their mental health has deteriorated. 7 out of 10 people say that they can't sleep at night. We regularly have people contacting us, telling us that they've had enough and that they can't continue on. COVID has made things even harder as well. I cannot communicate to anyone who isn't a leaseholder in one of these buildings the fear and the complete sense of just limbo. You can't see what your future is going to be like because all you can see is bills and worry. And so the impact of living in one of these buildings is horrific. And we also shouldn't forget that mental health affects our physical health. It affects our relationships. It affects our work. It affects the people around us. People tell us that they can't concentrate at work. 1 in 4, in fact, actually said that they've had to take time off work because of the situations. Others tell us that they feel suicidal at least once every day. People have had to turn down jobs in other cities. People can't start families. People being diagnosed with new conditions. There is no doubt that this is going to have an impact on NHS demand. And the NHS is already stretched, particularly from a mental health perspective. So this problem causes a mental health issue, but it's got a very clear fix. And in the interim of time, given that we've been talking about timeframes, we have to be addressing the mental health impact that this is having, because it's going to go on for so long, because as I think it was Nigel said, it's not going to be over in the next year. So what we want to see things from MHCLG with regards to mental health. They could have ensured that residents were offered mental health support. They haven't. They could have worked with local councils to provide mental health support and assurance. They haven't. They could have provided basic mental health information for every resident in buildings, and we're still waiting for that. They could have looked at ways to communicate with management agents, because that's where a lot of the mental health issues come from. They could have looked at council tax reforms. They haven't. Relief. They haven't. They could have chosen not to betray leaseholders and issued them with loans. There are so many things that could be done for the mental health of these leaseholders who are facing absolute torment.
Okay, I think I'll end there and pass back to Clive for the next questions.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Yes, I mean, I think we can not begin to understand the agony and the stress that leaseholders are going through in this situation. But that was really well put, Will, to get across to the committee and those watching what it's like. Can I come on now to Florence Eshalomi, who's going to look at some of the issues around other challenges and other problems, such as Waking Watch. Florence.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Will, you touched on the bills that leaseholders are having to look at and the impact that's having on their mental health. So obviously we know in December, the government announced a £30 million Waking Watch Relief Fund, which, as you know, is intended to help pay for the alarm systems for buildings which are 17.7 metres over, and where leaseholders are being forced, in effect, to pay for those waking watches. And those figures are high. I know that, just looking at my constituency, I've been quoted from constituents in excess of £10,000. Do you think that there's been a thorough assessment on that? And is that fund that was announced in December sufficient enough?
Well, I think I would like to go on record and say that the Waking Watch Relief Fund is the first time the government have actually recognised that leaseholders are facing interim costs and tried to provide a solution. So we are grateful for that. That is a welcome step. But the Waking Watch costs, they're not small costs. The average Waking Watch cost is 17,500, and I think the minimum cost would be 10,500 a month. And I don't think the fund is sufficient. It misses the mark again. In London, there are 590 buildings with a Waking Watch, and the fund has been announced that it should be only covering between 300 and 460 buildings. So in London, there's £16,000 an hour is spent on Waking Watchers. And so by the end of this week, since the £30 million announcement for the fund, 30 million will have been spent on Waking Watchers. And the fund hasn't even opened in Greater London yet. And on top of that, we know as well that we've spent well over £30 million worth of VAT on Waking Watchers since Grenfell. So we don't really view this as new funding. And then, of course, the fund has only a limited amount of time that it's open for. So what happens to the buildings that, say, do an intrusive survey in 3 or 4 months' time and discover that they need a Waking Watch? What happens about buildings under 17.7 metres who are burdened with loans and now who have to pay for Waking Watchers and can't access a Waking Watch Relief Fund? These costs are huge. And now, mine included, my service charge far exceeds my monthly mortgage repayments. And then just to quickly touch on the Waking Watch scheme itself, because I have a lot of issues with it myself. I know we've been applying for it in our building, but looking at the practicalities of such a fund, if you want to achieve benefit from this fund, then the process has to be quick and it has to be simple. In my building, there is a £7,000 a week waking watch. As an aside, that is actually 7 weeks of my junior doctor salary every year that solely goes onto waking watch. But anyway, since that fund was announced, we've spent £76,000 on a waking watch, and we still have no funding for the £89,000 alarm. So you can see that unless the waking watch cost is minuscule and the alarm cost is enormous, which, by the way, is a situation that never exists, unless funding is immediate, it actually quickly loses any benefit to leaseholders. And I think the other thing to note as well is that in my building, we have actually been told that to remove the waking watch, we can either install an alarm or we can complete £70,000 worth of compartmentation works. It seems perverse to me that a waking watch relief fund, the aim of which is to remove the waking watch, would fund an £89,000 alarm with taxpayers' money, but it wouldn't fund a cheaper option which would achieve the same outcome. And then the last thing on the waking watch thing as well is you can put an alarm in a building, but you still are going to require someone on site to aid the simultaneous evacuation in accordance with NFCC guidance. So that will be at cost to leasehold as well. So no, I don't think the fund is sufficient. I think it completely misses the mark. And I think that the costs that leaseholders are facing and will continue to face are horrendous.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. Dean, from a leasehold knowledge perspective, do you think that there's been a total assessment of the cost of the waking watch, and in essence maybe the average cost to leaseholders? We're hearing these different figures. If you're in London, it's quite high because of the cost of housing in London anyway, but essentially those figures are quite high, and another complexity to the whole issue of leasehold for leaseholders.
Again, not a subject I'm expert on or even competent in, but we found it difficult to make such an assessment, and I would say Will's sort of personal assessment is probably the best we can get to.
Nigel, is there anything you could add to this, and if it's something that you have covered?
I can back up Will some of his numbers. We've got some stats which we have provided to HCLG, and the average was £213,000 per year per block. So it's a significant sum of money. It's a leech that's been sucking the blood out of leaseholders for a long time, and it will have a long-term effect. So in a few years' time, Will, I don't know if you have a lift, but at some stage that's going to break. And you've been probably putting money aside because it's £60,000 to do a lift and it'll last 15 years. That money's gone. So you're going to have to find that money. Ditto for a roof, which lasts 25. You've been squirreling away money in a reserve fund. That's all been hoovered up. So there's going to be a long-term effect of this as well by having drained all these reserve funds. But that's, some stats, that was 53 blocks gave us that figure. But again, it gives you an idea of the scale. £213,000 per annum is a significant sum to be taking out of leaseholders.
One of the other associated issue and wider issues around the insurance, and again, in addition to the bills that leaseholders are receiving for waking watch, there's also the issue of insurance premiums rocketing through the roof. Another bill, as you mentioned, these bills that keep coming in the post will. And one of the things that in the report last year on cladding remediation, the government did say that they are publishing some guidance on the building safety bill, and they said that they will address that issue of insurance related to building safety. Do you think that this is something that has been taken into account of?
No, I don't think
you're all nodding no.
I don't think they've addressed it. I don't think they promised to do so, but leaseholders, the decks in Runcorn is a really good example. I think in 2019 their insurance was £33,000, and their insurance premium is now over £500,000.
Wow.
And we've got buildings as well that are totally uninsured as well, which is forcing leaseholders to be in breach of their own mortgage. They will argue that the market isn't broken, but I personally think that if there's 1,000% increase, then that's not the sign of a healthy market, and it's a sign that intervention is needed.
Yeah. Nigel, what do you think the government should do to support leaseholders experiencing difficulties in terms of unaffordable insurance cover?
Well, it's going to make me sound like a statistician, but as Dean says, without stats, we really don't know where we're going. So again, some statistics for you. We looked at around about 150 blocks, just under, and the average increase was 400%. So
Wow.
you're talking per leaseholder going up from around about £350 to £1,450. Of that sample, 10% had increases over 1,000%. One of them had it from 1,840%, which is quite phenomenal. We have discussed this with the government, and I'm going to put something in here that, as ARMA, we went round the insurers and we came up with a scheme which would require government, if you like, top slicing, as Kevin Hollenrake put it. But that's the scheme. There would be that the insurers would would pay anything up to the first 250,000 for fire-related only, and above that, the government would step in. Now, obviously, that then lowers the risk to the insurers. The premiums would probably, and I say only double. I don't say that with any pleasure, but that's what that is better than 1,000%. At the moment, the government has said that, perhaps unsurprisingly, HMT has no appetite to help fund. But if you think about it, that small sample we've got, those 143 units of blocks went from 7 million to 29 million. So they've already paid that 25 million, frankly. So there doesn't seem to be any interest in the scheme that we put forward. That's fine. There's no obligation to it. But I suppose my question back to government has been, okay, what's plan B then? Or is it just to leave the leaseholders to their own affairs, which I don't think is right?
No, great. Is there anything you wanted to add, Dean?
Yeah, I think so. The question of this rocketing of insurance premiums, and we've assessed 6 times. Nigel said 4 times, and you get up to 15 times in certain cases. But we have to ask questions about how the insurers are actually modelling these risks. General insurance works by looking at the probability of anything happening, and given it happening, what the cost of it would be for it happening. Then they multiply the two together. This is very rough. They multiply the two together, then divide that by the number of people paying premiums, and that gives you the premium. How can it be that costs would rocket in this place? The insurers have had these risk models in place for many, many years. That's how they work. I think someone has to look into this. Perhaps the regulator, the PRA, regulates general insurance companies. But I think there are some serious questions to ask.
Thank you. I'll leave it there, Chair, mindful of time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Lawrence. Moving on now to look at the EWS1 forms and the challenges around getting those. Mary Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. And just moving on really to the wider issues around this. The Secretary of State said in his statement that he expected the interventions that he'd announced, including on EWS1 forms, to provide confidence to lenders, which will, in his words, restore the effective lending, purchasing and selling of properties as soon as possible. How reassured are you that the necessary certainty has been provided to the market? Dean, could I start with you?
Sorry, the certainty about what again? Sorry, I missed the question.
In terms of the EWS1 forms and the interventions that were made, providing certainty to the market.
Not that I can see is the only answer to that. I'm more generally on the question of certainty. Generally, the market doesn't like uncertainty, and if that uncertainty exists, it will charge a risk premium for that. And what we're seeing in the case of flats is that some quite large markdowns in the market price of these flats that are affected, not just regarding EWS, but really regarding anything, any unit that has sort of cladding issues or even possible cladding issues. We're seeing quite. There was a report last week, an article saying sort of 20% type numbers, which for London properties is quite a large amount. So yeah.
And is that 20% directly attributable to the wider issues around this?
The data was from, I forgot the name of the company, but it basically buys something like we will buy your house or we will buy your home, and they were giving us these numbers, yeah, and they were attributing it to the cladding.
Thank you, Nigel. You indicated earlier that the market will adjust. Will it?
Well, the thing with the EWS1, the new forms, etc., I know the Secretary of State said that will ease 500,000 people out of it. I don't know how yet, simply because I haven't seen the details. It's a statement, but I don't know how it will actually work. So I think, as Dean says, it's the uncertainty in the market. It's all very well. As managing agents, we've had this argument. I know members of mine have gone to lenders and said, look, this block is below 18 meters, so therefore it doesn't need the EWS1 form. And the mortgager is not obliged to lend. So the answer is, well, no EWS, no mortgage. What do you want to do?
Do you see that situation changing?
I don't know what the detail is. And, I'd love it if we didn't need to use these things. But you have to remember where EWS1 forms came from. And they are not the problem. The problem is the mortgage community has turned around and says we can no longer trust the building safety certificate. So we don't know how that building's been built. So we need something else. And I think, and that's the problem. It's not the EWS1 form, it's the underlying uncertainty, which, as Dean says, puts everybody into a bit of a funk about it. I'm sorry, I'm going to segue a completely different tack as well. But again, Dean just reminded me, these loans to the sub 18 meters, that will crystallize on sale. There is no way that I won't turn around to you, Mary, and say, you've got 10 years left at £50. So what's that, £6,000? So I'm going to knock £6,000 off my offering price. That's how it works. Sorry, I went slightly off to the tack there, but I think it's important to realise the consequence.
Yes, it's important in terms of the wider market for the effect that it's going to have on people who are living in these homes. William,
it's going to affect the whole. One last thing. Sorry, it's going to affect. It's not just going to affect these flats. These are feeder flats. If you think, I could be sitting in a mansion in Surrey with a moat, thinking, thank goodness I don't have cladding. I've got a chain, and somewhere down that chain is somebody with cladding. So it's going to affect everybody, not just the people who are actually physically living in those flats at the moment.
Has an estimate been done on the effect of this on the wider market?
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
Not as far as we're aware, but echoing what Nigel just said, this will feed through to the whole chain. Anyone who wants to sell a property and trade up or trade down, anyone who wants to sell may have a buyer who wants to buy but can't sell their property because of cladding issues. So it's not just the people with cladding issues that are affected, it's the whole market.
So how concerned should we be about this impact on the wider market?
Very. I mean, we have a perfect storm here. It's just ghastly what's happening to the market. We have the cladding, then we believe the non-cladding is going to perhaps dwarf that. You've got the stopping of the sales. Rentals could start stopping because we are, as managing agents, we're being approached by the lettings agents saying you need to certify before I can rent that this building is safe, and we're going, well, we can't because we don't know. So it could be, sorry, I sound like a bit of a doom monger here, but it could be very, very significant across the whole property market.
And are you seeing signs of that directly now?
Yes, for quite some time now, yes.
Thank you. William, Dean, have you something more to say?
Well, yeah. I mean, another big impact, I don't know if a housing committee wants to consider this, but the really big impact will come when it impacts banking capital ratios. Banks have a sliver of capital available to absorb losses, and some of those losses could be caused by the borrowers defaulting on their mortgages. If those ratios begin to slip, and if banks become clearly in trouble, then that affects all of us, because we all have money with banks. Okay, there's a compensation scheme there that's available, but then people have to claim on that. So, can they be claiming on, cladding? Could they be claiming on cladding deficits, or are they claiming on losing all their money to some high street bank? I mean, it's a really serious issue if we hit that point.
I think that's going to come.
Sorry, what are banks doing then at the moment? I mean, are they intervening, or are they lobbying? What are they trying to do to
banks?
This off? Are they involved? In other words,
banks are lobbying. We know that. And what are the banks doing? We don't know, because obviously they wouldn't be saying. One question I'd have would be to the Bank of England, which looks at these capital ratios and looks at the stress tests. And my first question would be: has the PRA for the bank done the relevant banking stress test to include the impact of cladding? Can't see that they have. Someone should ask them.
Thank you. Nigel, are there any, do we know that there are any inquiries afoot to look into this very issue?
Not that I'm aware of, but
ratios?
This is going to happen very soon because, again, if I take my example, William, great, we've got the Building Safety Fund, but I need £25,500 off you. William is going to say, I can't afford that. And what then happens is you go to the mortgager and say, William can't afford it. We have to do this. Would you be prepared to put that in? And then, as Dean says, that affects their ratios. This is going to start happening very, very soon. The horrible scenario on that is somebody without a mortgage. You are bound to find, I'm afraid, a 90-year-old war veteran who has no mortgage and a state pension, and that's forfeiture. That's the only way that can be achieved if the requirement is to make the building safe. So all of these are coming very, very soon.
Are we seeing another issue, which is going back a couple of decades of repossessions, etc.?
It's quite possible, yes. Quite possible. I mean, nobody wants to go down that route, but if you have to make the building safe, you're obliged to. The only route for money at the moment is the leaseholders, and that means either their mortgages have to pay, or if they don't have a mortgage and no access to funds, then it's a forfeiture, which is a terrible thing to. Nobody wants to go down that route.
William, this is the hard reality of it. It's the effect and the impact on the assets that people have put so much of their money and their future into. How do you see this, the effect on the wider market of these issues?
Well, I'm sure you've all probably heard of Hayley, a leaseholder in Leeds who went bankrupt last year. Hayley should never have arrived at this situation, and Hayley won't be the first. Hayley won't be the last. To experience this and have to, declare bankruptcy and hand the flat back. There's been a lot of talk just then about that sort of chain. The first rung of the housing ladder has been effectively taken away by this problem. I think the Times reported recently that half of flat sales of half flat transactions worth £1.6 billion have been lost in September. So, yeah, I mean, the implications are huge. And one of the main problems is the government's own consolidated advice note, which currently states that buildings of any height should have an assessment of cladding as part of their fire risk assessment. So the lenders need the support and endorsement of the new RICS guidelines from government, and that be that in a communication from HCLG or from their expert panel, so that it's consistent with current government advice notes.
Do you think any of this will give the reassurance to people who are wanting to sell and buy these homes?
Who knows? I mean, I think until we tackle the things way beyond cladding, and until we have a plan for them, I don't see a way forward.
Thank you. Back to you, please, Clive, now.
Thank you, Mary. Moving on now to Mohammed's going to ask some questions about who should be held accountable at the end of the day. Mohammed Yassin.
Thank you very much, Clive. The government announced that a gateway to developer levy will be introduced, hoping to ensure that the industry takes collective responsibility for historical building safety defects. Do you think the industry has taken responsibility? Can I start with you, Will, please?
Absolutely not. The 5 biggest developers have made £10 billion in profits since Grenfell, and they've given £4.5 billion to their shareholders in dividends. The government Help to Buy scheme, £13 billion have been given out to developers. In November, £7.1 billion was announced for new home building funds. So the idea of a £200 million a year levy for 10 years is entirely inadequate. The developers are laughing. They have got away scot-free. These are the people that have created this problem. And I think if we look at it and say, OK, it's going to cost £15 billion, then the current levy would see developers pay just 13%. Taxpayers would pay $5 billion and the leaseholders would pay over 50%. It's an absolute farce. And it really puts it into perspective how little this levy is. When you look at Persimmon's profits, they made £1.04 billion in pre-tax profits, meaning they themselves could actually pay the annual levy for the entire industry and use up less than 20% of their annual pre-tax profits. where's the incentive to clean up their act?
Thanks. Nigel, your views, please.
Well, I have to echo what Will says. I mean, why should anybody, frankly, downstream of Gateway 3, i.e. occupation, be held accountable for this? It's nothing to do with any of those people. You're saying, does it pay it back? Well, no, it doesn't. We've seen that there's 5 billion going in. You're going to get 2 billion back. That's 3 billion left with the taxpayers. You can have a certain argument, a certain sympathy with, when I built this, I asked for permission to build, and building control said it was okay, and now changed the goalpost. Bit of sympathy there. But when we're coming on to the non-cladding costs, which we haven't factored into that, and which I hate to say, suspect will equal this, then that's just bad building. It's unconscionable. So no, I don't think we have yet bottomed out the better funding model. There's other parties involved, so people who falsified data to make their products available and installed. I think that is something which I'd be very keen to see. I'm sure that's waiting for the Grenfell inquiry to finish, but that seems to be an obvious source of funding. There's warranties, insurance, that's being pursued at the moment. But no, at the moment, it's a start, but it doesn't feel like a complete solution. And say what Dean's proposal is one potential solution as well, just to try and, as long as the leaseholders don't get stuck with it.
The government is also proposing a new tax for the property development sector, raising to 2 billion over a decade. Do you think that this is a fair contribution, as the government is suggesting? Nigel?
Well, I think it really depends at what stage it comes in, because if it means new buyers are actually eventually paying it because it's being added to their bill, then that doesn't seem fair either, because why should that brand new leaseholder or owner pay? If it's further upstream, so it affects the pre-sales price, if you like, so I think that would be more applicable.
What's your view, Will, please?
No, I don't think so. But I just want to go back to something Nigel was just saying about it not just being the developers and other people. I mean, like he was saying, the Grenfell inquiry is uncovering a horrendous amount of corruption from the likes of people like Kingspan, and yet the market continues to seem to believe that these companies are not going to be subject to penalties. Their share prices keep increasing. UBS upgraded the stock from sell to neutral this month. It doesn't seem to me as if the industry is taking responsibility. And then the other people as well that I think we need to be looking at asking hard questions of is the government themselves. I think it's pretty concerning that the Building Safety Bill is being pushed through at such a pace before we've heard Module 6 of the Grenfell inquiry, which looks at government involvement as well.
Thanks. Dean, would you like to add anything?
Not really. I only to echo what Nigel and Will have said, but perhaps to add, I think one of the questions was the 2 billion enough? I think our proposal, the LKP proposal, came in at a bit larger. I think it might have been 4 or 5 billion, but that's all up for grabs anyway. The other thing is, I think the being paid over 10 years was actually part of the LKP proposal that the government borrowed without attribution, if you like. A significant part of our proposal is start at year 5 and end at year 15. That's really important, because then you're not seizing up the market by extra cost. You're not penalising current first-time buyers. That 5 years would allow you a chance to get the market right, but we're not seeing that now. It seems more like a form of windfall tax, and at the same time, it's not really enough.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, and thank you to all our witnesses. You've given us an awful lot of evidence, and certainly from the information we received at first hand there, that Will gave us, really harrowing account of what it's like. Because in the end, we can talk about these figures, can't we? We can talk about numbers, we can talk about the technical details, but in the end, these are people's homes. They bought them as a place to live and to enjoy, and that's the last thing they're able to do at present. That they're sat in a home where they feel trapped in it with these massive bills hanging around their necks, and frightened about the future. And we simply can't allow that to carry on. So thank you all very much indeed for coming this afternoon. That's really helpful evidence, and we're putting these challenging questions that you raised with us to the Minister next week.